26. Chapter 26. Aftercare is important. Hermione Jean Granger woke up screaming. The last thing she remembered was staring down the rune-generated red dot optics of her Walther PPK into the eye of the Queen of Basilisks, as her iris slid the inner cover over her eye to protect it from Hermione's flames. She felt her body stiffening, her heart struggle to beat. She had breathed in, but could not let the half-breath out for her shooting technique. She pulled the trigger, and her finger barely generated the 8 pounds of force for the double action shot. The recoil was minimal, even though the runic upgrades on the barrel allowed the little 380 pistol caliber round to break the sound barrier before it exited the barrel, moving at a little over 4,800 feet per second, or 1463 meters per second. She really felt that dabbling in potions to make overpowered rounds had been a mistake. She then had to use runes to harden the barrel and more potions to further temper the frame. Of course, then, she had to use more runes to harden the bullet for its journey through the short barrel. But with the spin imparted by the lands, the interaction between the runes on the bullet and the runes of the barrel could make an array to further increase the penetration. Honestly, what started as a defense against muggles, when she was not allowed to use her wand, had turned into a theoretical project to see if she could pack the power of a muggle anti-material rifle into the cute little gun James Bond carried. It turns out you could. She felt her breathing stop, felt the panic well up as she could not even open her mouth to scream, and as her vision grayed out from the edges, as the retinal fluid in her eyes hardened to something less human, the last sight she saw was the eye of the basilisk burst under her shot. Across from her another form, blond and thinner than he should be, also shot up from bed screaming. Draco Malfoy. The look of terror in his eyes was wild and far from sane. It shocked Hermione back into awareness. She was in a bed. She was in the hospital wing. By extension, she was alive, which suggested they had won. A hauntingly beautiful woman threw herself across Draco. Her strong arms gathered him into her breast, and the overproud 12-year-old boy wailed like a terrified toddler and shook like a broken thing. Narcissa Malfoy gathered her son to her and glared at Hermione as she spoke to her son again and again. "Softly, my dragon, softly. He is gone, you are well. He is gone, you are strong. You are whole again, my dragon. Rest, Draco, rest. No one will hurt you again. Mother will see to it." Narcissa's voice held all the helpless rage in the world, and Hermione found herself turning away from those eyes. She turned her head and saw something disturbing. Herself, sort of. Hermione looked upon a portrait of her, a magical portrait. It showed her in Hufflepuff formal robes, which she very much was not wearing in prison or in the Chamber of Secrets. It showed her wreathed in flames. That part was true, hair flying out behind her like a banner, which can't be true. Her hair was pretty much a drool and snot-filled mess, where it wasn't filled with rat bones from the floor of the chamber and hours of torture. Her eyes blazed, and as the basilisk reared, she plunged what looked like the sword of Gryffindor through the eye, only to slowly turn to stone as her blade sank home. Hermione had been sure she had peed herself. Her nose was bleeding, her tongue bitten half through, her face was a mass of scratches, and her eyes were swollen bruises, her hair looking like she had been locked in a goblin punishment pit for a month. She had put a bullet into the basilisk at about 5 meters, just out of splatter range of the most toxic blood on Earth. Her weapon was a stubby little Walther PPK designed for concealment, not a great mothering broadsword. She certainly hadn't put on dress robes and gone to the hair stylist before the final blow, nor was she sure had she killed the basilisk. At best, she would have blinded it for a few minutes. She assumed someone had killed it, or she rather expected she would have been added to the lovely collection of bones on the chamber floor. What in Morgana's name is that? Hermione blinked as the magical portrait again cycled through her, rising from being bound, struck a heroic pose, wrapped in flames like an avenging angel, and drove her sword through the eye of the Queen of Basilisks, and supposedly killing her as she slowly, and presumably heroically, petrified. Narcissa Malfoy laughed softly from the next bed, where she held a trembling Draco in her arms. "That is titled Our Lady of Flame by former Auror Dawlish. He painted it at St. Mungo's as part of his physiotherapy for the loss of his arm. He felt very strongly about your saving his life. He said some rather nice things about you, Considering your blood status and his known affiliations, that is quite an impression you made on him. Narcissa said, Mouse giver, you are awake. Have the witch who heals give you something to eat. It will not be a mouse, but no one else is your equal. You will have to make do. Noodle hissed from where he coiled in what she supposed was an incubator from Hagrid's care of magical creatures stores. The snake looked unwell, being in the middle of a difficult molt, his previous skin being grey and quite stony. Noodle, you are well. I tried to stop her from biting you, and was afraid her gaze already killed you. How did you come rescue me? I thought no serpent could ever raise its fangs against the royal serpents. Hermione gushed in happy parcel tongue. She should not have threatened my mouse giver. Vive la revolution, you will have to talk to Speaker. He has gotten into bed with the oppressor. Also, he failed to introduce her to his mother, so I am pretty sure he will be killed when he goes home. Noodle said ominously and went back to his nap. Narcissa looked at Hermione for a long time. She spoke softly then, as if to herself. So it is true. You speak parcel tongue, like the Dark Lord. Narcissa said. Millicent Bulstrode walked over, holding a tray of food, and laughed softly. Madame Malfoy, I think you will find we speak parcel tongue better than Voldemort. The last 2 times I have seen him, all he was doing was screaming and dying. Of course, before he was dying the last time, he was making a very good try at killing your son Draco, and we were making a rather hard go of keeping him alive. Narcissa smiled softly, and her voice firmed and hardened before she replied. Miss Bulstrode, I give greetings to Lady Selwyn from the House of Black. I am Narcissa Black, daughter of House Black. I have chosen to dissolve my marriage with Lord Malfoy. I had hoped to be a widow by now, but he was still breathing, or at least screaming, when his portkey took him away. Narcissa Black, mother to Draco Malfoy and former wife of Lucius Malfoy, offered firmly and clearly. Hermione looked at the usually cold and expressionless face of Narcissa Black and found something wild and dangerous looking back at her. I was unaware that noble and ancient marriage contracts were so easily dissolved. Hermione offered carefully. Narcissa smiled. I am from the most ancient and noble house of Black. Lucius Malfoy's house is both newer and lower than my own. In our marriage, I had primacy. With the loss of so many of our clan during the Blood War, mostly falling in the service of the Dark Lord, I chose to let my husband act as the senior and not press my rights, as the only remaining Blacks were rotting in Azkaban, and I foolishly felt my future lay with House Malfoy. Hermione picked at her food, looking down at the tray and not at Narcissa as she worked up the nerve to ask her final question. What made you change your mind? Hermione asked. Magic gathered about Narcissa Malfoy, cold and dark. The shadows lengthened until they gathered about her in a pool, until only the pale shining of her face peered from the whispering darkness that cloaked her. When that corrupted creature that called himself a man sent a diary to this school that tried to eat my son's soul. My beloved husband tried to defend his mistake by telling me it would be an honor if our son's sacrifice brought back his Dark Lord. Perhaps he thought his master wearing my beloved son's corpse as a trophy was acceptable for House Malfoy, but House Black cares for their heirs better. Narcissa smiled softly, the room lightening as she stroked Draco's hair and kissed his head. Draco will still inherit Malfoy, of course. Where I cut his father before he fled, there will be neither other women nor other heirs in his future. Millicent Bulstrode and Narcissa Malfoy shared a very Slytherin laugh, while Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy shared a glance filled with horror. Meanwhile, in the potions dungeon, Neville Longbottom found himself standing before Professor Snape's desk with a bottle in his hands and a very determined expression on his face. Professor Snape leaned back in his chair and swept his robes trailing sleeves back as he looked down a long, hooked nose at the Longbottom boy. Mr. Longbottom, you have neither destroyed any of my precious cauldrons, nor failed to turn in an acceptable brew in any of your classes, even with your usual and more conventionally competent female cohorts. So, Snape said, pausing dramatically. Why am I looking at you? Snape said, steepling his fingers and looking over them like an acromantula examining something wriggling and interesting in its web. Professor Snape, sir, do you remember the group project Miss Granger, Miss Bulstrode, Mr. Potter and myself came to you about? Neville asked innocently, as only a Hufflepuff could be innocent. Snape smiled. In all the petrifications, the murder, possession by dead dark lords, and general political bloodletting, he almost forgot the Granger girls' crusade against perverts. One particular potion based Professor Pervert in particular. Snape placed his hands on his desk and eyed the rather large bottle in the Longbottom boy's hands. With growing interest and a great deal of frustrated hunger, he looked at the bottle again, extending his senses. "Am I to understand you have completed your Immortentia antidote?" Snape asked hungrily. Neville blushed and pushed the bottle onto Snape's desk. "We think so, sir. We based it on our special potion, so it should be quite a bit more powerful than the standard antidote." Hermione was concerned that the sudden reversal of the love effect might trigger a negative response. Professor Snape took out a sample pipette and in a few minutes made a test strip. He dipped it into Snape's own best Immortentia potion, and the vial of pink love potion turned a sickly green and began to stink rather like fresh troll. Neville took a step back in alarm as Professor Snape began to laugh. It was low and soft first, but broke into something that belonged in theatrical villain monologues. It was terrifying, and that is compared to Tom Riddle and a basilisk. Snape got himself under control, and with a soft smile he resumed speaking. "Mr. Longbottom, am I to understand that your group is continuing in their goal to write a paper on this amazing new love potion antidote?" Snape asked softly. "Yes, sir. But Miss Bulstrode and Granger asked that I request a proper potions master or healer be present for the test, for safety's sake," Neville said softly. Snape smiled broadly, without showing any teeth. Neville remarked, not for the first time, how much Snape's tooth-hidden smile reminded him of Noodle when he looked at a well-potioned mouse from Hermione. "If I recall correctly, your group was interested in the defense against the Dark Arts Room. Some concern about potential love potion contamination, no doubt accidental and very minor," said Severus Snape, looking about as innocent as Noodle when he found not a rat in the girls' shower. "Yes, sir, Miss Granger should be waking up any day now, since you made the mandrake drafts to remove the petrifications. I would like to give her some good news about our group project," Neville said hopefully. He continued quietly, more than a little nervous about Snape's smile. Sir, Miss Bulstrode wondered if you had something to aerosolize the antidote," Neville said, trailing off in fear of asking the terrifying potion's master for a further favor. To his surprise, Professor Snape stood up fast as any serpent and smiled with bared teeth. "Oh, Mr. Longbottom, I really must insist. Come, this is your project. Since you have too much sense to ever lower yourself to make those annoying dung bombs the Weasley twins waste their time creating, you will find the technology is fairly similar. I will guide you through the process, and then we will proceed to the Dada classroom together and let you give it a gentle toss in and see what happens," Professor Snape said happily. 20 minutes later, Professor Snape had sent a Slytherin prefect to fetch Professor Sprout and Neville, Hermione and Harry's head of house, and a rather confused Professor McGonagall as deputy headmistress to witness the employment of the Hufflepuff Serpent Collective Antidote, Mark I. Neville Longbottom was somewhere between elated and terrified. A year ago, he would not have been able to breathe or speak at this point, but a certain number of near-death experiences will bring a shift in outlook to any boy. His inner badger tended to stop him from overthinking things. When things got tough, you stopped thinking, put your head down, and dug for all you were worth. "Really, Severus, I am very busy right now." With all the petrifications, and Mr. Potter's refusal to open the Chamber of Secrets to allow Professor Dumbledore to harvest the materials from the dead basilisk, the matter of the jailbreak, the question of the legality of auras imprisoning Hogwarts students at all without charge or trial. I have quite a few matters that require my urgent attention. Is this really necessary? Professor Pomfrey had a scowl upon her face as she had been exchanging whispers with her Hufflepuff second year on the trip to the fifth-year Dada class. She didn't like the suggestion that Gilderoy Lockhart was microdosing all his classes with a Mortentia. She respected Gilderoy Lockhart. She adored him. She absolutely could not bear to think anything bad about him at all. Having listened to Neville's words, and feeling her own mind and body's reaction, Professor Sprout began to feel her own magic stir defensively as a panic that her thoughts and feelings might not be entirely her own, started the old witch's magic begin to claw at the layers of almost unheard compulsions that Professor Lockhart had managed to instill right under their noses. "Minerva, I think it best we step into the classroom and let Neville make his test," Professor Sprout said, smiling sweetly. "I think it should be fine to witness from outside the door, don't you think, Pomona? I don't want to disrupt a fifth-year defense against the dark arts class. The Gryffindor and Slytherin students in there are working towards their owl exams in just a few months. They need all the time under Gildra they can get," McGonagall said, not noticing the snickering of Severus Snape. Professor Snape knocked on the door before sweeping in with McGonagall and Sprout on his heels. Last and least, Neville Longbottom of Longbottom squared his shoulders and brought a palm-sized red heart, like a large valentine, that had the letters G and L written on it in flowery script. "Good day, professors, Mr. Longbottom. I trust you need me for something important," Gilderoy Lockhart said, striking a dramatic pose and flashing a smile that actually flashed in a way that just could not be natural. A class full of supposedly serious witches and wizards preparing for their owls was staring at Gilderoy with the sort of vapid adoration of devoted fangirls and boys to their first meeting with their idol, not students prepping for a major do or die educational and career qualification. Neville smiled and held up the monogrammed heart and said loudly enough for the whole class to hear, "This is from Hermione Granger. She says, 'Good luck.'" Neville said, then cast the heart down, which erupted in a cloud of pink smoke that smelled of clarity, purity, self-awareness. Now Muggles would say those things do not have smells, but Muggles think potions are just medicines they don't understand. Muggles are weird that way. Potions are magic, just subtler about it, except when they are powerful enough to stop being subtle and start being dramatic. Gilderoy Lockhart felt his skin begin to burn. He sprayed himself with his own formation love potion every day after drinking his own special antidote. No sense catching yourself along with the next lucky, lovely young girl. He sprayed under his ears, his wrists, and a single manly puff under each arm, so that even if he sweat, it just made him sexier to every one of the lovely young ladies he was picking among. Right now, those areas felt like they were on fire. Looking over at the smiling, full-sized portrait of himself, he saw his portrait pointing at him and shouting, "You are turning green." Lockhart froze. Green was the test response color to the Amortentia antidote. His own special potion was supposed to suppress that. His potion was microdosed for his classes and fan conventions, but it was strong. His recipe he had stolen from a potions master he interviewed, then oblivated so the poor fool will never remember he created it, let alone that Gilderoy stole it. His was stronger than the book version. His was unblockable, untestable. "Merlin's balls," shouted a very angry Slytherin fifth-year female prefect. "I've been love-potioned." She was the first, but dozens of girls who had some form of occlumency training felt their mind finally able to cut through the fog and deliver the months of alarms at the changes in their thoughts and shading of their memories. It was a Gryffindor who fired first, but two Slytherins were shortly behind her. Lockhart threw up a shield and began to try to explain. Now, it's not like it sounds. It's only a perfume. Not really enough to make you do anything you don't want to. Right, girls? I mean, who can blame you? I'm hard to resist." Gilderoy tried, striking a heroic pose and giving his 5 times which weekly best smile to the class. That would be when the Slytherin female prefect lit his hair on fire and a Gryffindor girl caught him with a full body bind. "I can't believe I kissed him," sobbed one girl, and a second hugged her and confessed the same. Professor McGonagall's face turned to cold iron, and with a wave of her wand, the stone of the castle floor formed a fist that grabbed Lockhart, leaving only his head exposed. "Professor Lockhart, I was just called from a very important meeting with Professor Dumbledore and a number of very angry and frustrated auras who really want to punish someone. I think it would be lovely if you joined that meeting and gave all sides someone we can agree truly deserves a nice meet and greet at an island spa I feel a very strong desire for you to visit. It is called Azkaban." McGonagall's Scots brogue had thickened to dangerous levels, and it was only the speed of her passage through the class and out the door to Dumbledore's office that put out the fire in Lockhart's hair. Neville Longbottom felt a claw-like hand descend on his shoulder. He looked back in alarm to see Professor Severus Snape laughing helplessly and silently. His eyes flashed in a dark, uncomplicated cruelty as he drank in the fall of Gilderoy Lockhart and savored it like the finest whiskey. Straightening up, he addressed the class very firmly. "I am afraid class is cancelled today, and for further notice. The headmaster will update your timetables when remedial Dada classes can be offered. For now, I suggest you move to the infirmary. Madame Pomfrey will give you a thorough check-up, and I believe the Auras will want to talk to you." Guiding Neville Longbottom out the door, Professor Severus Snape made the unusual gesture of awarding house points, a thing he gave so rarely to houses other than his own that many swore he had to cut them out of his own flesh. "Mr. Longbottom, advise your potions group that I expect at least 2 feet from each of them on the preparation of this potion, beginning with its inspiration, and very definitely including both the Amortentia brewing and the antidote. While for security reasons, I will not be able to publish this until you are all safely out of our headmaster's somewhat magically conservative hands. The work both deserves and requires reward. Assuming I receive complete and satisfactory documentation, I will be awarding each of you 10 points," Professor Snape said, then patted Neville on the shoulder. "Mr. Longbottom, please feel free to come to me with any further special projects your little group conceives. I find you collectively far less dunderheaded than the normal crop of Hogwarts students," Snape said as he walked out of sight. Neville wasn't sure, but he may have been whistling. He shook his head. No one would believe that. Still, the news that Hermione would not have to apologize to Lockhart would be good to greet her with when she woke up. He smiled and decided to beat the rush to the infirmary. He wanted to tell the story before the hordes of Dada students started to descend on the infirmary. At roughly the same time in Dumbledore's office, Dumbledore, Cornelius Fudge, Amelia Bones, and Harry Potter sat around Dumbledore's desk, while 2 pairs of auras, one from the Minster of Magic and one from the DMLE who theoretically should command both, glared at each other. Since one of Amelia's was Alastair, Mad-Eye Moody, the glaring was anything but even. Cornelius Fudge glared at Dumbledore. "You swore there was no such thing as the Chamber of Secrets." Dumbledore spread his fingers and made a patting motion, attempting to quiet the Minister of Magic, as if he was an angry student or parent. Now, Cornelius, neither your auras, nor my house elves, portraits, ghosts, or own magic have ever been able to detect it. No one has ever seen the basilisk in all the years that Hogwarts has existed," Dumbledore offered softly. Amelia Bones adjusted her monocle and glared at Dumbledore. "They kill with a glance, Dumbledore. Myrtle Warren haunts one of your own bathrooms here. Of course no one has seen them. They get killed or petrified if they did. The portraits that went dark, the ghosts that got petrified, they are not signs no one has seen a basilisk. They are signs no one saw a basilisk and lived to report back. A rather different statement, that." Dumbledore ground his teeth, then turned to Harry Potter and smiled, his eyes twinkling. "But now we have found the Chamber of Secrets, and we have the boy who lived who can open it for us." Dumbledore smiled happily. The sale of the parts of a 1,000-year-old basilisk could underwrite the operation of Hogwarts for a decade without having to go to the Board of Governors and Lucius Malfoy begging for every cost of living increase. Plus, he would be able to find and destroy all of Salazar Slytherin's profane writings. The dark magic of Parseltongue must be expunged. That must be what turned Tom. He would make sure it never turned another. Harry smiled and spread his hands. "Sorry, Professor. The Chamber of Secrets was opened because some Death Eater sent Tom Riddle's diary into the school in hopes it would find someone vulnerable and seduce them into offering it away into their soul. Draco did that, and Tom Riddle possessed him. We managed to kill the basilisk and destroy the diary. Turns out basilisk venom can destroy a Horcrux, but when he died, Tom Riddle went all Voldemort on us and decided if he couldn't have the chamber, no one could." Dumbledore took the chance and lanced his legilmency into Harry when their eyes met. Dumbledore flinched as his mind slammed into a nightmare forest of coils and scales, his own mind retreating before the flash of fangs and eyes that glowed killing gold. Dumbledore looked at Harry in shock, and Harry smiled with all the innocence of Hufflepuff. Cornelius Fudge was outraged. "You can't say that. That was never proved. That was rampant speculation on the part of Mad Eye Moody and slander of a good wizard whose disappearance was most likely because of Voldemort. Cornelius was getting farther worked up. That information was classified. Even hearing about Horcrux is enough to get you questioned, and speaking it is worth a trip to Azkaban. The minister raged. Auras, arrest this boy. Fudge concluded, waving his hand at Harry Amelia Bones' side, and gestured at Mad Eye Moody, who loomed behind her. He simply growled, and the minister's security detail remembered who scared them more, and who they legally worked for, and stayed put. Madame Bones then sighed, and stated the obvious for the rather more agitated than alert minister. I rather think he got the name from Voldemort himself, whom he has killed 3 times now, which rather makes keeping the existence of Horcrux a secret from him rather moot, don't you think, Cornelius? Amelia suggested, sharing a long, suffering glance with Harry. Dumbledore sighed. I was rather hoping I would not have to burden you with that knowledge, Harry. Even to learn of them taints the soul, dark knowledge like, that can twist even the brightest soul. I have been searching for them for several years. It is my intention that you will never have to bother with them. Trust in your professors to keep you safe. Dumbledore said, smiling serenely, like he didn't just try to mind rape Harry less than a minute before. That would be when Minerva McGonagall, Pomona Sprout, and Severus Snape flowed into Dumbledore's ever more crowded office, towing a green-faced, smoking-haired Professor Gilderoy Lockhart trapped in a giant copy of Professor McGonagall's own fist. Ah, good Albus, you still have auras here. Arrest Professor Lockhart. Send your auras down to the infirmary to begin taking statements. You may want to summon more, or you will be at it for days. McGonagall said sadly. Dumbledore was stunned, not having a clue what was happening. Minerva, why is Professor Lockhart bound, and why haven't his wounds been seen to before seeking auras? Dumbledore demanded, his voice rising in ire as his patience for a day full of disappointments failed him. Professor Sprout was already answering. He was dosing everyone with illegal and overstrength love potions, Albus. He was taking advantage of students as young as 5th year. If you didn't have auras here on site already, I have several plants that could use a good source of vitamins. Moody stumped forward, wand out, and stuck very firmly in Lockhart's face. His face was too scarred to hold any expression beyond dangerous, but he radiated that now. He barked out a simple question to his old head of house. Pomona, what the hell is going on in this school? What has he been doing? Moody said, his natural eye never leaving Lockhart, nor his wand wavering. 3 of my Hufflepuffs and 1 of Severus Slytherin's second years, began Professor Sprout. Snape cut in. That would be Mr. Longbottom and Potter, Miss Granger and Bulstrode. Moody's mad eye rolled at Dumbledore, then Snape, Harry, and back to Sprout. Those would be the ones you tried to lock up, Albus, the ones who had to break out of jail to save your bloody school. Moody snarled. Dumbledore winced. That was unkindly put, Alastair, but yes, those are indeed the same students. Professor Sprout gave a huff of annoyance at all the interruptions, then continued. These 4 students came to Severus with the concern that Harry's familiar Noodle, the snake, had detected a Mortentia in the Dada classroom, coming from Gilderoy Lockhart. Miss Granger was concerned that he might be taking advantage of young students whose will was compromised with love potion, although no one had reported any assaults or inappropriate contact. Moody gave a bark of laughter. They wouldn't, would they? I was a bit surprised when he started writing his books and playing celebrity. You see, we used to see him a lot back in the bad old days of the war, every time the battles spilled into Muggle lands. Lockhart here was an observator. His job was to wipe the memories of any Muggles who saw things they shouldn't. Add that to a pervert messing with love potion girls, and an ugly chain of thoughts starts to form. How did 4 second years bag him? Moody asked, turning to Sprout and Snape. Professor Sprout turned to Snape and asked, Severus. The potion master smiled and bowed, continuing the tale. Miss Bulstrode came to seek my assistance as a potion master in an experiment. It seemed that Miss Granger was concerned that there was evidence of a Mortentia use that was beating the standard detection and countermeasures. Since we know that stronger Mortentia cannot be detected or countered by weaker Mortentia, they sought permission to create an experimental stronger Mortentia and base a new test, an antidote off of this stronger experimental version. The potion master smiled. The test was spectacularly successful. The antidote potion caused a rather strong and instant removal of the effects of both the attraction and the suggestion aspects of the immortentia. The fifth grade Gryffindors and my Slytherins chose to express their opinion of being victimized with a fairly vigorous display of the Dada curriculum. Hence Professor Lockhart's current, somewhat battered, appearance. Amelia Bones slammed her hand down onto the table and snapped at Albus Dumbledore. A zombie possessed by Voldemort, a potion-peddling pervert, who do you plan to invite to teach defense of the dark arts to our children next, Albus? A vampire. You know Beauxbatons has a very good program. I might have to look at it for Susan if your Dada instructors keep being the dark thing we need to defend against. Amelia Bones snarled with rather less politeness than she normally used. Professor Sprout looked at Harry, who was grinning happily at yet another Dada professor who didn't last out the year. She sighed and turned to Dumbledore. Miss Granger and Noodle should be reviving about now. Since there is nothing further you need to interrogate my student for, I should like Mr. Potter to be free to go see his friends. Professor Sprout received a tired nod from Dumbledore, a firm one from Bones, and a painful one from Fudge. Harry left to the sounds of several voices all trying to shout at once. Harry grinned. Neville and Millicent would be there when Hermione and Noodle woke up. Everything would be better when they were back together. Hours later, Dumbledore sat nursing a headache potion a house elf brought up from the infirmary. Of all the cheeky insults he had to swallow in his own office, Amelia Bones suggesting he employ a vampire as Dada instructor. The very thought. Then a thought struck him. Not a vampire, of course. Much too dangerous. Still, he did know a werewolf. With the serious black matter now threatening to become an issue again, it might be good to have this particular werewolf again under Albus' protection, and feeling properly indebted for it, of course. Young Harry was already showing disturbing signs of dabbling in black magic. That duel with Tom Riddle and Harry had been like watching two Dark Lords fight for dominance, not like watching the boy who lived trusting in the protection of love and the gift of his mother to end Voldemort by offering his own life. It would have been a mistake to sacrifice himself before Dumbledore found and destroyed all the Horcrux, but Harry seemed almost to be seeking to meet Voldemort as an equal, as a fellow Dark Lord. This was Dumbledore's last war, his legacy. His gift to a wizarding world to repay for the sins of his youth. He would end the Dark Lord Voldemort and make sure none rose after him. Harry just had to be brought around. The right influences, and he could still be saved. He had come too far to fail. 27. Chapter 27, Badgering Snakes. Book 3, Dementors in Paradise, Harry Potter, and the Prisoner of Azkaban from Hogsmeade Station to King's Cross Station in London was 9 hours long, and the survivors of the Chamber of Secrets had set that time aside for finally sharing their truths about what had happened on that fateful day. Narcissa Black, while comforting a very badly damaged Draco, had communicated to Hermione and Millicent two very important facts. First, that House Black held itself in life debt to the four of them for the life of Narcissa Black and House Malfoy's heir. Second, and more troubling, everything said at Hogwarts was overheard. How much of it Dumbledore could sift through, even with a mind as advanced as the Champion of Light, was anybody's guess. But she advised that a head of Hogwarts Board of Governors, her ex-husband Lucius, routinely received transcripts of conversations that could not possibly have been overheard from individuals or pairings that Dumbledore spent the time to track. Most had managed to sneak off the Chamber of Secrets to share their information, but Hermione had more important things than basilisks or Dark Lords to worry about. Until her year-end exams were over, the fate of the world could sarding wait its turn. Draco, huddled in the corner of the compartment, unaware if he should affect his public Slytherin superior sneer, or his more open and human face worn with friends and close family. They knew his weakness and shame, but outside of that most terrible intimacy, they didn't actually know each other. Honestly, even sharing a house with Millicent, he hadn't bothered to learn anything about her until she took the Selwyn house by conquest. Harry was sprawled out with Noodle's back half in a healing ointment, while Hermione was seated more properly, and working the same ointment into the more prestigious part of Noodle, as Mouse Giver was Mouse Giver, and Speaker should of course not be surprised, since he put other snakes first, that Noodle should find a better quality monkey. Millicent slid open the door with a smirk and slammed it behind her. She worked herself through the charm she had learned from all the auras interrogating her and set up a privacy ward about their compartment. "We lost Neville. He's gone for the trip. The firsties got him," Millicent reported with a shrug and a quick superior smile. Harry frowned. "What do you mean the firsties got him? They can't be homesick. He played Cuddle Badger for them for weeks when they got to Hogwarts, but they have been fine for months." Millicent gave a very soft and dark Slytherin laugh. "He did too good a job, didn't he? Now they are riding the train station home, and the idea they will be separated for 2 whole months has them in tears, mostly all over Neville's fur. Honestly, I am going to have to scourgify him before I allow him within hugging distance." Draco Malfoy was actually shocked out of the dark spiral of his thoughts as his mind worked through what his companions had been saying, and the sudden image painted itself in Draco's battered brain and broke his pure blood control. "Are you telling me that Longbottom of Longbottom, heir to that most ancient and noble house, one of the sacred 28, is playing teddy bear to a bunch of snivelling Hufflepuff first years?" Draco said sharply, sounding quite offended. Millicent shrugged. "Teddy Badger, actually. Not just a house totem, but a super soft animated cuddle magnet. Honestly, Longbottom makes an improbably large badger, and yet somehow managed to look cute, even with claws like a furry dragon." Draco shouted. "He's a lord. What about his dignity?" Harry snickered. "He's a Hufflepuff, and they are scared. From our point of view, he is lording right now." Draco folded his arms and looked like he wanted to keep objecting. "You cannot rule and snuggle at the same time. Yellow-haired prey cannot rule and snuggle at the same time. Observe my majesty. Mousegiver snuggles as well as any Hufflepuff ever born and rightly receives my full attention. Speaker is not totally incompetent and may make himself useful in those places Mousegiver cannot easily reach." Noodle said firmly, and Draco got a puzzled look upon his face, as if he could follow the gist of the conversation, but not all of it. Harry sighed and slowly took Draco through Noodle's speech, making Draco hiss back the bits he initially missed. Tom Riddle had been fairly far along writing his memories into Draco's physical brain when Draco pushed out the dissolving remnants of the Dark Lord as Harry was digesting him. Noodle and Neville had been working with both Harry and Draco to process the toxic leftovers of Tom Riddle's mind and soul. Draco got none of Voldemort's powers, but the scraps of memory that dug deepest into Draco's brain, and thus tended to remain, were Tom Riddle's most emotionally charged and formative memories. To say they were deeply traumatizing, the sheltered Malfoy Sprague was putting it mildly. Noodle was teaching Draco the parcel-magic version of occlumency, which had a very reptilian view on any knowledge contained in the violating memories. If it's shiny, we keeps it. If it's not shiny, we destroys it. Draco very much wanted Parseltongue, and while the gift itself was not planted in Draco, memories of speaking and understanding it, memories of thinking in it, were present in his brain. Noodle was teaching Draco to take those scattered bits of trauma and build a working language structure out of it. Neville was trying to teach Draco how to live with what is inside him. Oh, the occlumency lessons were going far to build the reflexive distancing from memories once identified as foreign. The real problem was that Draco had been a nasty little boy who played at being a future monster with no idea what his words and actions meant. Now he had a full understanding of the pain he caused and the harm his casual cruelty had caused, far beyond his intentions. He could not simply distance himself from those memories, because they were his. The memories had not changed. The Draco, looking back on them, was no longer as blind to the harm he did, nor willing to lie to himself about it. Draco had lost the battle for his soul to a monster that had been his goal, his future master, his chosen ruler and the wellspring of his morality. Tom Riddle had deceived, defeated, and discarded Draco Malfoy as simply another nameless, faceless, and worthless victims. Draco had not been important or valuable. Draco had not been special. Draco had been prey. Harry Potter had not simply defeated Tom Riddle's soul fragment in the diary, he had eaten it. Draco was busy dying when Harry's dead mother dragged him back to his body and forced him to fight for it, fight to live. Now he had to live in a world he didn't understand. As a person, he was no longer proud to be. Yellow-haired prey, Draco hissed in parcel tongue. I really was nothing but prey, and my dear Death Eater father offered me up on a plate, so happy the Dark Lord would be wearing my corpse like a set of robes for his return. Noodlehead butted Draco firmly in the forehead and hissed at him. All hatchlings are prey. Learn, grow, learn when to hide, when to hunt, when to flee, when to fight, and when to wait patiently and in silence. You need not always be prey. Noodle hissed in what passed for Rock Viper parenting. Millicent, who was a better Slytherin than Draco had been, because she began powerless and had to learn and grow into the powerful force in the house she was today, knew it was time for a subject change. Speaking of waiting in patience, Hermione, you are not human. You have waited weeks to find out what happened in the Chamber of Secrets after you were petrified. No Slytherin could have stayed away from a secret that long, Millicent said in exasperation. Hermione blushed and focused on salving Noodle. I spent 2 of those weeks petrified, so they don't count. Then it was only 2 weeks before exams, and you all had weeks more revision than I had. I needed all of my thoughts focused on the exams, or all the hard work I put in all year would have been wasted. Hermione frowned. Besides, once you tell me, I'm pretty sure I will be angry and not talking to you for the dangerous and stupid things you did without my supervision. Clearly, this would have impacted my study time and exam results. Hermione said firmly. Draco burst out, you can't be serious. Harry laughed, and Millicent patted Draco on the hand, muttering, Hufflepuffs. You get used to it. Harry began to explain the fight and the after effects. Hermione, in fact, did get mad. I can't believe you got a basilisk pregnant. Harry, that is so irresponsible. You are 12. Hermione raged. 13 in a month and a bit, Harry protested, but Noodle hissed at him in support of Hermione's point. You aren't even old enough to take a girl to Hogsmeade, let alone make a girl pregnant. Then it's not even a girl, it's a basilisk. That is so wrong on so many levels. Didn't you pay attention in health class when Madame Pomfrey made all the boys demonstrate the prophylactic charm? Hermione raged. Harry held up his hands. Hang on, that isn't fair. No one told me you could get pregnant from biting each other. Plus I was a basilisk at the time. It's not like I could wave my wand around. It's not like I exactly consented. Hermione waved a finger at Harry. I killed one pervert already this year, and we got a second one arrested. Do not tempt me to make it 3. You potioned that poor innocent basilisk with a mortentia. Special ritual enhanced a mortentia with Noodle's magic snake venom in it to make it especially powerful against basilisks. You took advantage of that basilisk, and now you have to take responsibility. Then she looked troubled. She was already treated badly and messed up mentally by the heir of Slytherin. Salazar set her up as guardian, then Riddle comes along and compels her to hurt and murder the student she was raised to protect. Parselmouths were supposed to guide her in defense of this school. Instead, they have abused and used her. Do better, Hermione said, and Harry suddenly looked serious. Harry was called Speaker by the snakes, not a speaker. The Speaker. From him came the gift of parcel magic to share with others. The last one called that way had been Salazar Slytherin, who sought to bind his gift to his bloodline so that it would always be present among wizards. He was the bridge between serpents and wizards, and his duty was to both in equal measure. Harry looked up at Hermione and smiled. I am a goblin of Gringotts. I am Harry Potter, son of Griphook, and no child of mine will go hungry, nor stand alone before its enemies. While you were busy being petrified, I spent weeks hunting Acromantula. Millicent rolled her eyes. Oh yes, he hunted them, but Neville and I had to help drag them back. Do you know how awkward dragging an 8-legged monstrosity through heavy woods is at night? Harry shrugged and blushed. It is the mate's job to bring the kills back to the brooding mother. Honestly, that's about all she cares about. She ate about 60 acromantua and went to sleep. Probably won't lay her eggs for about 20 years, Noodle says. I have to be gainfully employed by then. Lots of little snakelets to feed and educate. Hermione frowned. So you aren't married or anything? Noodle laughed. She is the queen of basilisk. Honestly, she only made him hunt for her to show he values her. Male snakes know enough to stay far away once the female snake has what she needs. If she calls him back a second time, it won't be for several hundred years. Sort of a bite-bite-bye-bye whirlwind romance. 2 snakes passing in the night. If you think about it right, you are totally just a rebound guy after Salazar Slytherin. Nothing personal, Harry, but he's a hard act to follow. Millicent offered kindly. Draco looked from face to face of his companions in growing horror. To them, this was a normal conversation. This was now his world. How sheltered had he been? Harry was the one frowning now. One thing I pressed Dumbledore on and got nothing but the run around about was the release of Sirius Black. Moody confirmed he was never tried, never even interrogated. His trial transcripts were forged after the fact, and 2 of the 3 judges who were supposed to be on the 3-person tribunal had been dead for months already. Harry was getting angry enough that the air of the compartment began to crackle with electricity. Amelia Bones said her attempt as head of the DMLE to submit a request to retrial from the Wizengamot was blocked by Dumbledore as supreme mugwump. Dumbledore said it was at Minister Fudge's request, which means Lucius Malfoy, who basically bought Fudge outright when he was first trying for the job. Dumbledore swears it is because Sirius Black's transcripts are responsible for several very important House Lords getting released, and should those cases get opened up again, not only will the government fall, but there might be civil war. Millicent snorted. So, sacrifices have to be made, not him of course, but Sirius, his supposed loyal follower. Coincidentally, Sirius is simultaneously Harry's godfather, which would make him not Dumbledore the House Potter proxy in the Wizengamot, and House Black Lord, which would take away Lucius Malfoy's proxy for the Black vote in the Wizengamot. Draco sneered. You forget, cousin, he's also my uncle and the legal Lord Black. With my mother's divorce, as Lord Black he would have the right to challenge my father for the Malfoy seat in my name. The seat and the fortune. Draco looked up, his eyes bright and hard. I watched Mother duel Father twice. She was easily his equal, possibly better, but during both fights Mother swore that Lucius wouldn't last 10 seconds against Sirius if he returned. Cousin Bellatrix was Sirius' only equal with the wand. Hermione frowned. So Peter Pettigrew, who was the innocent victim, who died as the reason for sending Sirius to Azkaban, never died, and turned out to be a mocked death eater has been found. No evidence that Sirius ever betrayed Harry's parents has ever been presented, and of course Peter Pettigrew has the dark mark everyone confirms Sirius never had. There is 0 evidence Sirius was ever guilty. Every evidence that Peter Pettigrew was guilty of betraying James and Lilly Potter. Every reason to suspect the Muggle killings at Pettigrew's fake death were in fact done by Pettigrew, but Sirius rots without a trial in Azkaban because gosh, so very many people would have to stop spending other people's money if he came back. Millicent straightened up in her seat and shouted happily. Oh, Hermione, that was brilliant. We will make a proper Slytherin of you yet. Hermione frowned but continued. Is there nothing we can do for Sirius? Millicent smiled coldly. Of course not. There are no legal means to extract him from Azkaban. Sadly, we are powerless. Millicent said almost primly. Draco's eyes went wide, and Noodle turned to look at her before nodding. Harry sighed and changed to a less troubling subject. So, did you girls have any luck with your animagus potions this year? I know we brewed a better version this time, and you took yours off with the whole witches' coven on that women's weekend back after midterms. Hermione's eyes lit up. I get the strong impression of fire and wings. I can hear the cry, but I can't quite sink into it. There is something I have to change about my fire before it will really fit. I have been spending every spare moment either in the library looking at magical birds or bothering Hagrid, because he's like a Merlin of dangerous creatures. Harry nodded. His own journey to unlocking the basilisk was the same. The magic was more instinct than thought. You had to feel it first, understand it second, then learn it last of all. Your mind got in the way more than anything else. He turned to Millicent. How about you, Millie? Harry asked Millicent. Bulstrode smiled broadly, then examined her nails, as if making sure her manicure was still impeccable or her nail beds hadn't concealed the secrets of the universe while she wasn't watching. No progress at all, sadly. Very disappointing, said Millicent, not at all sounding disappointed. Harry blinked, too Hufflepuff to have caught the several layers of implications. No luck at all. Did you need Neville and I to help? Draco was at his limit of Hufflepuff communication failures and finally snapped at Harry. Potter, your father manages half of Gringotts. For Merlin's sake, have him buy you a clue, Draco said in exasperation. How can someone so good at reading motivations, fears, and pains in other people be so utterly incapable of picking up on Millicent's very clear, for Slytherin, establishment of the fact she was absolutely not an animagus, and getting Sirius Black out of Azkaban was clearly impossible. Honestly, no wonder Uncle Severus had to use Gryffindors to break them out of jail. How can two reasonably intelligent Hufflepuffs miss the fact that Millicent Bulstrode, Lady of House Selwyn by right of conquest, had just announced to anyone with two brain cells to rub together that she was going to break Sirius Black out of Azkaban? Hufflepuffs were going to drive him insane. Draco started to laugh. Not bitter, ironic laughter. Not terrified, half-hysterical laughter. Just honest to Merlin humor. They were so Hufflepuff, it almost hurt to hear them think. Yet somehow they kept defeating the Dark Lord, Dumbledore, and any number of powerful and feared factions that by all rights should have crushed them utterly. The picture of Lord Neville Longbottom passed out asleep as a badger with a pile of no less than 9 first-year girls burrowed into his fur stuck in his head like the picture Carling Creevey snapped and promised to send to all of them. Hufflepuffs were just wrong, but maybe he needed it. Just a bit. 28. Chapter 28. Noble Lady Shopping. Millicent Bulstrode swam powerfully. In all honesty, she did everything powerfully. In a house full of fine-boned, delicate hothouse flower maidens, Millicent Bulstrode had a face that could best be described as strong and had less charitably been described as thuggish. She grew up in a society that prized slim-hipped, small-boned, delicate women, and she had shoulders broad as her father already, legs muscles that swelled like an Amazon, and arms that did not taper to tiny wrists, and delicate fingers made for fine china and maidenly fans, but broadswords and battle-axe. Well, they also did fine with a bludger's bat, and at least in that way found a socially acceptable use for who she was always going to be. She had struggled her entire life with the table manners required of a lady of House Bulstrode. Not, of course, the lady of the house, that was her aunt, nor even consort to the heir secundus, that would be her own mother. Still, she had been expected to somehow compete in the delicate dance of innuendo and insult, of status and serenity that was the battleground of the tea party and banquet. Her physical appearance would forever handicap her at the dance of manners and elegance that was pure blood society, almost as much as her half-blood status. She had gone into that quiet war the ugly half-blood extra daughter of a minor house, and she had held her own. Her aunt never knew the tears that cost her. Millicent would pay whatever price that cost happily, and her mother knew enough to pretend she didn't see. That made the current situation delightfully ironic on so many levels. You almost had to be Slytherin to understand it. She was about 60 kilometers out to sea in the North Sea, swimming in 2 to 4 meter swells and winds measured in the Beaufort storm scale with a freshly killed seal in her teeth, and the blood was giving her a terrible case of the munchies. She didn't begrudge her Hufflepuff friends the lives they had led, nor the gifts they had been given by fate. She loved all 3 of the little idiots, even if she would never be gauche enough to say it. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the goblin of Gringotts, who casually went around eating Dark Lord souls like canapes at the buffet and impregnated basilisks on the first date of course, had a basilisk as his animagus form. It was the totem of her house, the serpent. It was the beast of Salazar Slytherin. So of course fate gave it to a Hufflepuff because wasn't that funny? Neville Longbottom turned into a badger, because of course the quiet, sensitive boy who could turn into quite the most terrifying killer when he needed to protect someone would turn into a bundle of fangs and claws, so cute that entire dorms of females wanted to cuddle him. Neville didn't just turn into the Hufflepuff totem, he literally embodied it. The dolt hadn't even an ounce of Slytherin to understand how he could parlay that particularly powerful Hufflepuff charisma to rise almost without effort to political power. It was almost painful to her to realize, if he ever did realize his charisma gave him that power, he would take steps never to abuse it. It was enough to make a grown Slytherin cry. She was a half-grown Slytherin, so it just made her use the words Fred and George Weasley taught her. Remarkably earthy, those Weasley boys. Peter Pettigrew turned into a rat, and of course as a Gryffindor his only thought was to use the single best stealth and spy form known to wizard kind to perv on underage girls in the shower. If Millicent Bulstrode had gained that power, the ability to turn into a rat, mouse, bug, or even a nondescript post owl, she would have been a goddess of stealth and shadows, an information broker without peer whose weapons were secrets, and whose power was both unquestioned and unseen. Her hands would forever be clean, for her weapon would be secrets. It was every Slytherin's dream. Millicent Bulstrode felt the cold wash over her fur, felt the power of the ice clawing at all life, demanding its surrender to the endless stillness that preceded its unwanted intrusion into the perfect order of stillness, silence of the ice and void. Millicent Bulstrode didn't get a cuddly badger, a sneaky rat, or lordly basilisk. Millicent Bulstrode got a great mothering polar bear the size of a thistral that pulled the Hogwarts carriages. The cold of the sea lapped at her fur, the power of the storm whipped waves battered her, but the massive paws of the polar bear cut through the North Sea like the blades of a destroyer. But her body moved inside the waves, rather than fighting them like the Muggle warship that would fear breaking up or sinking should they catch these waves abeam. Seal clutched in her mouth tasted good, and when she got to shore, she was going to rip it open with claws the length of her human hands and tear into it with fangs longer than her human fingers. She was going to bury her face in it, and be damned if anyone would say a word about her Merlin, be damned table manners. Millicent Bulstrode was never going to be a delicate flower like Daphne Greengrass or Pansy Parkinson. She would never be a stunning beauty like Narcissa Malfoy or the Black Widow Zabini. She no longer cared. Neither her gender nor her blood status would stand in her way. If she could not smile, blush and eyelash flutter her way to power and status, she would take it with her own power and let those weaker than her gossip behind her back how she got it. They would fall silent when she passed, and that was enough. Millicent Bulstrode felt the cold and cruelty of the North Sea, the power of the storm, the cold elemental fury that hated all life and knew she was home. Her animagus form was a polar bear, not a subtle spy, not a cuddly or cute mascot that masked its lethality behind a nature-issued tuxedo. She was a primal hunter of the ice, an apex predator. A very young apex predator with a Slytherin's understanding that as powerful as a polar bear was, to the orca she had seen pass earlier, she too was just food. Still, to what waited on the island she approached, she was not food. Azkaban, the forbidden prison of wizards, sat on a storm-tossed island in the North Sea. Halfway between Scotland and Scandinavia, nobody ever wanted the place because the confluence of ley lines that warped magic where they crossed were some of the darkest in the world. A dark lord had lived, been left alone, and eventually died here. When Wizarding Britain went to deal with the starving Dementors who began to leave the island, they eventually struck a deal with the Dementors they did not have the strength to wipe out, but had no intention of letting onto British shores. Azkaban would be left to the Dementors, but the wizards of Britain would use the island as its prison. The prisoners would be the Dementors' food. In return, they would bow to ministry control, as long as they were well fed, and keep prisoner all those witches and wizards deemed too dangerous to be allowed free. Granted, half the time this meant politically, not criminally, but the Dementors were remarkably non-judgmental about the morality or even legality of their buffet. As long as the food screamed and twitched, they were happy. They fed on happy. They drained all the positive memories and emotions from their prey, feeding on that as they fed on the life energy and magic that was bound in those memories. In a very real sense, those memories were bound to your soul, and Dementors used them to tear off tiny pieces of the human soul to feed and sustain them. Eventually, you ran out of bites and died. Stronger witches and wizards both lasted longer and tasted better, but nobody lasted forever. That was fine. Wizard politics and actual crime continued to provide Azkaban's Dementors with all they could eat, and in return, no one given to them escaped. Millicent felt the tide rush, smelled what humans persistently called the smell of the sea, which was really the smell of the shore, or particularly the tide line that was the eternal war zone between sea and shore. Wizard or Muggle, humans were very good at ignoring facts that got in the way of their beliefs, so thousands of years after they had gone to sea and realized that the smell they called the sea was really only about the last few hundred meters before shore, polar bears knew better. She felt the powerful wards of Azkaban wash over her, and fail to grip. After all, they sought witch and wizard. The odd magic of house elves was so very vulnerable to dementors that none of them would dare apparate her, nor have the power to defend themselves or leave if they did. The wards did not care about animals, nor could the dementors that cruised overhead. They could not taste her, and the pathetic cold of the grave that was their weapon was less than nothing to a being of the endless and eternal cold that was Millicent Bulstrode. Her belly rumbled. Sure meant she could finally open this seal. Sirius Black was her gift to Harry Potter. Oh, she also had plans for him with Draco Malfoy and Narcissa Black, what Slytherin would fail to squeeze as many uses out of expendable assets as she could. While she was here, she would pick up another gift for Neville. It was simply accepted that when Slytherin ladies traveled, they would shop, and the gifts they bought would be wildly and outrageously expensive. It was the done thing, and Millicent Bulstrode was too well raised a Slytherin lady not to follow the done thing. She had no idea what to do for Hermione. The girl was practical to a fault, a very glaring fault she was somehow proud of. Honestly, breaking someone out of Azkaban was less daunting than shopping for Hermione Granger's gift for turning 13, a witch's majority. How annoying was that? Millicent Bulstrode, Polar Bear and Lady Selwyn by right of conquest tore open the seal with her claws and burrowed her muzzle inside and tore with her fangs. She bolted the meat, fat, and entrails steaming raw, and it was the best feast of her life. She tore and growled and ripped, her snow-white fur going pink, but in no way ever approaching the cuteness that a girl in pink supposedly naturally generated, but that was her life in a nutshell. Removed from all need for decorum, table manners, and delicacy, she ate like Ron Weasley set loose in the desert tray and regretted nothing. Then she curled up on the shore in the sun and napped. Prison breaks were traditionally done in darkness, and she was a well-brought-up Slytherin. Tradition was important. Covered in seal blood and guts, Millicent found that she could still be revolted almost beyond reason. By climbing up the great sewer pipe that oozed from Azkaban prison like the drainage shunt to the most corrupt wound in the universe. In her innocence, and to find she had won at this point, as a well-raised Slytherin, past her first murder, was a bit shocking. She had thought herself prepared for the grim realities of climbing up what was essentially the waste chute for all the internal sewers of a major prison. Well, she was wrong. Polar bears have an excellent sense of smell. They can smell a seal on the ice 30 kilometers away and catch the scent of a single breath from one using a breathing hole in the ice at least 6. The sewers of Azkaban were filled with the natural human wastes, as she was prepared for, but they were also filled with the rotting corpses of prisoners. Dementors ate souls, not bodies. The bodies of the expended prisoners were simply dropped down the sewers with the rest of the waste. Dementors do not smell physical things, just magic, memories, emotions, and souls. They know the smell of human filth, and decaying human bodies helps break down the minds of their prisoners and make them easier to digest, so they make no effort to clean up. Millicent decided she hated Dementors. The memoirs of Salazar Slytherin caution his followers to ration hate like the most precious of resources. Do not spend it idly, for fools waste it on mere annoyance or enmity, while the wise reserve their hatred to that whose existence is toxic to their very soul. Hate only that whose existence you would expend your very life to expunge. Even placing her life upon those scales, she still determined that she hated Dementors and those who made pacts with them. She climbed up through the sewers to the internal stairwell. The great tower was hollow, and in the pits swirled an endless eddy of dark within the dark, the Dementors of Azkaban. Some rose up the column to the cells, and the prisoners inside would scream as the Dementors fed. The guards rarely patrolled, and then in force, usually only for feeding time, as the protection amulets of the guards kept Dementors from attacking them, but anyone with the magic to be a guard could not block out the awareness of the Dementors feeding. Even a human sadist could not enjoy this, as the feeling made it quite clear the Dementors wanted to feed on all humanity. To them, all were prey. Millicent Bulstrode was about 300 kilograms of juvenile polar bear, unusually large for her gender of the breed, but Animagi tended to be exceptional. To her, the Dementors were simply unappetizing prey. To them, she may as well have been the stones of the castle, impervious and uninteresting to them in almost equal measure. She had the scent of Sirius Black. His motorcycle and his leather jacket had been with Hagrid. As the jacket would not have fit Hagrid past age 8, he had never touched it, and it had sat in Sirius saddle bags, untouched for years with his old spare Muggle clothes. Stalking up the tower, Millicent was in a bad mood. She had 2 scents that were close to the one she wanted, but so mixed in the air she couldn't tell which was which. Soon she heard one of the Dementors feeding, and a witch began laughing hysterically, calling for her Dark Lord's vengeance, swearing that when the Dementors bowed to her Dark Lord again, she would teach them the meaning of pain. Millicent tasted the air. That was one of the scents, like Sirius Black, but not. Smelled a bit like Narcissa Black, formerly Malfoy, but not. Ah, Bellatrix Lestrange, knee black. She was on Millicent's list. With a growl, Millicent padded towards the Dementor, who turned and projected its cold and despair. Millicent felt her magic stir within her. The dark ley lines of Azkaban and the cold of the North Sea, the natural power of her element, had never been so thick upon the air as now. Intellectually, Millicent knew Animagi cannot cast spells. The wild magic of the elements did not require spells. Sure, you could shape it with spells, amplify it with wands, and make it perform like wizard magic, but at heart it was the primal stuff of the universe. It was power from before words, before language, when humanity was a tiny scuttling thing cowering in holes and trees while ancient beasts ruled the earth. Millicent roared, and the ancient power of the void, the eternal cold of the night before creation sang. The Dementor froze, the bars of the cell froze, the stones of Azkaban froze, and the magic, woven into all of it, froze. A great white paw and dark claws slammed down, and the Dementor shattered. Millicent turned and shattered the bars. Bellatrix Lestrange laughed madly to see her. She gathered her wandless magic and struck with a cutting curse that would have killed a guard, as she had when she was still pretty enough they thought of rape. Of course, the guards were not 300-kilogram polar bears with heavy fur and fat between the vulnerable bits and enemy fang and claw. Millicent charged. Bellatrix Lestrange did not show any fear as she died. Millicent decided that she did House Black and House Slytherin reasonably proud for a psychotic murderess, at least in her end. She also decided she didn't really like the taste of human. Seal was better, but needs must when Morgana's dancing. She tore Bellatrix's head off and stacked it in the hallway, must remember to take it on the way back. The next 2 cells were Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrange. They did not resist and did beg. She hoped Bellatrix had been sold in marriage to whichever of those idiots had been her husband, because if that represented her free choice, she thought less of the witch. The 4th cell she opened and faced immediate attack. A great black grim. It was more than half-starved, and not more than 50 kilograms, looking like the largest wet dream of an Irish wolfhound with hair black as night and fangs that could double as daggers if you needed one. The grim would never have been her physical match. She was a polar bear, and unless you were as well, about the only thing she needed to fear were orca and dragons. Still, like Bellatrix, the grim gave it his all. His bite was ignorable, and her cuff was not. She swatted him tail over tea kettle back to the bed built into the wall, then shifted back to human form. The grim rose growling from where the pad of her paws had tossed him, aware and confused that she had avoided using her claws, and shocked to see a teenage witch in Slytherin house robes staring at him with a frown. "Are you serious, Orion Black, godfather of Harry James Potter?" Millicent said firmly. Sirius shifted into his wizard form, the tattered rags of his long-ago aura robes now almost unrecognizable in their filth and disrepair. "I'm Sirius Black, and who in Merlin's name are you? Some Death Eater come for a laugh. What do you think you can do? The Dementors can't." Sirius snarled his half-mad defiance. Millicent massaged her forehead. She felt a Gryffindor headache coming on. She sighed deeply. "I am not a Death Eater," Millicent began, but she then found herself having what she termed a Harry Potter moment, where her brain just hung a quick left in conversation and went places it shouldn't, and took everyone else along for the ride. "Of course, if you're what you eat, I suppose I am a little bit of at least 3 Death Eaters, which is a whole lot of ironic if you think about it a bit. I would be a whole lot more grey seal and possibly a fair bit of treacle tart." Millicent mused. Sirius Black was shocked out of his outrage, shook his shaggy, bearded head, and forced his cold grey eyes to focus as he shouted, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Sirius demanded. Millicent, blushing that she had been caught having a Harry Potter moment in public, wrote the lapse off to too long thinking in her head as she swam from Haroldswick in the Shetland Islands to Azkaban, though open ocean, answered his question. "I am Millicent Bulstrode, Lady Selwyn by right of conquest." "That means the old geezer pulled a wand on me over dinner, and I killed him. That one eye didn't eat. That makes 4 Death Eaters killed, and only 3 chewed, so it's not actually habitual, but you can't really cast spells in Azkaban without setting off all the alarms," Millicent said, as if this explained almost everything. Sirius Black blinked and answered simply, "What?" Millicent decided this was a Gryffindor, and she needed to communicate clearly using small words, or he might get lost and cost them valuable time. This was a jailbreak, and it behooved her to be swift. "I am a well-bred Slytherin, and my closest friends in the world are having their 13th birthday. What Harry Potter wants most in this world is family, and you are his godfather, so I am clearly here shopping," Millicent said simply. Gryffindor or no, he was raised black and understood there was no reasoning with a pure-blood noblewoman shopping. Sirius blinked again. "I'm a present," Millicent sniffed and pinched her nose. "Clearly I will have to wash you before wrapping, but since we have quite a few miles of the North Sea to swim through, I'm sure most of the stink will come off." Sirius looked offended, but she tossed him her school bag. "Hold this and stay human. I left Neville's gifts in the hallway. I don't want them dripping on the outside of that bag," Millicent said as she turned and walked away, seeing no reasonable alternative. Sirius Black followed. His shock was not diminished as he found himself holding out the teenage witch's school bag as she stuffed the heads of Rabastan and Rodolphus Lestrain, and his own demented sister Bellatrix Lestrain, into the bag. The heads appeared to have been torn off, supposedly in polar bear form. Sirius shuddered. Millicent saw Sirius shudder and snarled at him, unwilling to deal with his Gryffindor squeamishness when there was real work to be done. Honestly, she was afraid the Hufflepuffs were actually corrupting her. "Do not think to judge me, Black. These 3 in Barty Crouch, J.R. tortured Frank and Alice Longbottom so badly they had been trapped in endless torment for my friend Neville's entire life, until he had to end their suffering himself. He lived his entire life in fear of these Death Eaters, his only memories of his parents filled with his shame at being terrified to be dragged to his parents' bedsides to see them writhing in agony and unable to even recognize him. He is too good a boy to ever murder for simple revenge, but he needs it. I am Slytherin. I do what is necessary while Gryffindors rot in cells because they were too busy being brave and bold to be effective," Millicent said. "You are very important to Harry, but I don't actually know or even like you. If you fall behind, you will finish the trip like the seal I ate, dragged through the North Sea in my fangs. Keep up," Millicent threatened. Sirius Black found himself laughing. You almost had to be a marauder to appreciate it. Sirius Black, Lord Black, hit wizard, known and feared by all of Wizarding Britain, was being threatened by a little Slytherin girl headed into her 3rd year and being threatened effectively. "Ah, Pronglet," Sirius mused, giving the nickname of Harry, son of James Prongs Potter. "What have you gotten into?" When the girl turned back into a polar bear, showing the slower transformation of a relatively new animagus, Sirius was even more impressed. To be that new an animagus and decide your breakout prank would be an Azkaban raid was too extreme even for the famous marauders. His own transition to Padfoot the Grim was seamless and natural, faster than blinking and requiring even less thought. He passed what looked like frozen Dementor bits and took a long and satisfying pee on them. The polar bear looked on with the superiority of a well-born noble girl to crass and boorish behavior. Honestly, how she could act the Slytherin noblewoman covered in blood and bits of people that ought to remain unseen on the inside was beyond him. Still, it did firm his resolve to keep up on the swim. It was a long swim. By the end, he was shamefully sprawled on her back like a cub while she finished the swim, seemingly immune to the bitter cold and pounding waves. Sirius held on to the one thought: he would see Harry again. 29. Chapter 29, Perverts of Justice. Haroldswick in the Shetland Islands was beyond the range of wizarding Britain's Portkey and apparition wards. The most northern point, Skaw, has one listed human inhabitant, who the Muggles think is a sheep farmer. Since he does need to keep a large number of sheep for the dragons, it isn't completely inaccurate. Given an escape from Azkaban, the standard response is to place an Aura team in Skaw with a strong team of sniffers for any form of magical transportation. It is a decent standard response, based on the assumption that an escape from Azkaban would require a highly sophisticated strike team of dozens of wizards, spanning disciplines from runes, charms, transfiguration, with a powerful combat element specializing in soul-related spells like the Patronus. This response seemed geared for the escape they could conceive of, but failed utterly to detect the escape they got. A polar bear and unconscious Grim came ashore at Skaw. A young dragon stooped and dove at it. The common Welsh Green was young and very full of himself. He was a dragon, and the Grim was basically dead anyway. The polar bear could simply go grab a seal. It could not possibly be worth fighting a dragon. The logic was sound, and in the experience of the young dragon, nothing except a larger dragon or the wizard keeper had ever even tried to deny it anything. He had fire, claws, fangs, and well, he was a dragon. This was the truth of the world. Dragons took, and non-dragons took it. Millicent had a mouth full of wet fur. Wet Azkaban filth fur. Wet untreated sores weeping into unclean fur, and a dozen years thick. First Sirius had started swimming powerfully, but a dozen years of physical privation, starvation, non-existent exercise, and constant mental and spiritual torture had left him weak. After 20 kilometers, he was riding her back. After 60, he was in her mouth, dragged like a half-drowned puppy through a choppy North Sea to the first bit of land, if you want to call it that, she could reach. Finally, she gets wet, shuddering, filthy dog out of her mouth, and goes to wash her mouth out with sea water and some junior jackass Welsh green preserved dragon, not even a proper wild hunting dragon, but one step removed from a farm animal, a trust fund baby reptile, dove from the sky to steal and eat the Morgana be damned dog she had dragged all the way from Azkaban. Millicent possibly overreacted. She roared her defiance, and the dragon reacted as thousands of years of instincts taught him he should. It should be noted that dragons were a protected species because they were endangered. If your species is on the endangered list, you should think twice, or perhaps go have a nice long lie down and think a third time before following them. The Welsh Green roared his best roar. He was a juvenile, so it wasn't bad, but it wasn't yet good, and gave vent to all the fire in his young belly. It was overkill and would probably ruin the dog, but enough of the bear would survive to make a meal. And besides, you couldn't do this with sheep. There would be nothing left. He passed through his fire, which had stopped in mid-air and turned into mist, and cold mist at that. He had perhaps half a second to wonder why he felt cold before a diving dragon met a wide white paw with long, terrible claws. Very shortly, Millicent had something other than wet dog in her mouth, and her mood was improving. Turning back into a human, she took out her parchment and wrote to her minions. Minions, I am somewhere close to Scar. Look for the dead dragon. The dog is not stable, so bring me the harness, and a breath mint. Millicent saw the writing fade on her parchment, meaning it had been read. A cheery, smiley face, and then a second one were drawn in return. Her minions were minioning. All was well. Sirius had gorged himself on dragon meat, then thrown up, then gone back and gorged himself again. Honestly, she was not going to stand on table manners after a long swim from Azkaban. She smelled the dragon's blood and saw the half-starved Grim had at least eaten the liver, which was full of much of what he needed. Like a nutrient potion, only it bled when you took it. That made it better. Since her minions would be a while, she had time. She moved in to get a bit more of that good wing root muscle. That was the best steak a dragon had. The Grim tried growling at her, the whole alpha male dominance thing kicking off. That was pure human. An actual Grim would understand pissing off 300 kilograms of polar bear over her own dragon kill was not survivable. She kept her claws out, and she tossed him tushy over tea kettle back onto the strand. He yelped, which she didn't care about, and splashed, which was good. Sirius was seriously stinky. A long swim in the North Sea, and still he reeked. Crawling around in dragon guts improved his smell, and that statement did not bear thinking about. Still, he looked full when he staggered up to the grass and collapsed. Maybe he was ready to talk. She chewed the last of the dragon's wing root muscle. So tender. Love that young adult. No heavy metal build-up, no nasty scar tissue, no fat deposits, just good, clean wing steak. Got to be vitamins in there or something. Ah well, she did have to talk to him before the minions arrived. Crawling over to the grass, she turned back into a human. Cold and wet stayed, but due to her ice affinity and water magic, she felt good cold and wet. "Hey, Lord Black, are you up to talking?" Millicent said, too tired to turn her head and look. The Grim shuddered through its own change, and she looked over at Sirius for a good look under the late afternoon sun. He looked like something she would not eat if she passed it dead on the roadside. His eyes were sunk into deep bruises that passed for his eye sockets. His cheekbones were so prominent she thought she was looking at a skeleton. He had muscle drawn up over what she suspected began as a well-muscled swordsman or duelist's frame, but starved down to near skeletal. His eyes were wild and twitching. He looked like a madman who had spent a dozen years sitting on top of a mountain trying to learn the secrets of the universe, and has decided to come down from the mountain and kill us all. Super stable. Yep, this is what I am bringing home to Harry for a happy birthday. I am beginning to think 3 severed heads is the saner of my gifts. Hermione's is either going to go over really well or make everyone think I am the worst human being in existence. Still, it seemed a safer bet than Sirius. Slytherin. What is a Slytherin doing with Harry? They don't do favors for Gryffindors. Sirius said, and she guessed he was trying to be intimidating, but he was too weak to stand right now, the long swim having taken from him more than he had to give. Hufflepuff. Millicent said, Harry is a Hufflepuff. Neville is a Hufflepuff. Hermione is a Hufflepuff. Merlin, the only actual snake among us Noodle, is technically a Hufflepuff, although I claim dual citizenship for him in Slytherin, as he sometimes sleeps with me. Sirius looked confused, which Millicent thought wasn't totally unfair. Hufflepuffs were better at information dumps. Slytherins just cast shadows on the vague outline of a fact and expected you to fill in the rest out of context and innuendo. God, she really needed her minions right now for translator duty. You have a snake animagus in Hufflepuff? Sirius asked, shocked. Yes, I mean no. Yes, we do, but no, we don't admit it, and technically it is they, not we. The important bit is Noodle is a Hufflepuff, but not an animagus. He is a snake, a mind magic teacher, and he kills perverts on contract. See Hermione if you need some. Millicent clarified, which only increased Sirius confusion. It was then a black Vauxhall Astra 4-door station wagon pulled up and honked the horn. Sirius looked up to see 2 rangy late-teen gingers, looks like twins, pile out and come down to them. My queen, said Fred, your minions, continued George, have arrived. Finished Fred. Sirius was scrambling for a wand he didn't have when the 2 boys took out a strange series of leather straps and chains that made Sirius start to have flashbacks to the auras who kept him bound and gagged, never given a chance to speak until he was already locked up in Azkaban. He began to panic. Millicent grabbed Sirius' face and pulled his face down to look at her. She was a big-boned, strong girl, but he was a grown man. It shouldn't have been a contest. She was a beater who was at the peak of her training, and he was essentially a death camp survivor, so the arithmancy added up differently than Sirius thought. Focus, Sirius. These are my minions. Say hello to the escaped prisoner. Give him your Gryffindor secret handshake, or grunt and ball scratch. However you presentient life forms greet each other. Millicent said sharply. I'm Fred, said George. And I'm George, said Fred happily. Gryffindor beaters, said George. Pranksters, barn vivants, performance artists, enthused Fred, minions of her most violent majesty. Cooed George. I have ball gags, I am prepared to use them, snapped Millicent, noting the gear the boys seemed to have inexplicably filled a duffel bag with. Fred looked at her in awe. I am developing, said Fred, a fetish. Agreed George. Merlin's balls, what has Harry got himself into? Sirius began laughing. Millicent smiled indulgently, then opened the harness and gestured to Sirius. You are the single most wanted wizard on the planet right now. As an animagus, you cannot be tracked. We plan on keeping you as a dog while we move about the cities and towns. We are going to do some muggle shopping for clothes, and then smuggle you back into London so you can claim sanctuary with Harry. Millicent said softly. Sirius looked at the harness. What is the harness for? I'm not actually a dog. I don't need one. His paranoia was growing again. He would not be bound. Millicent sighed. Look serious. You are stark raving mad. Bonkers. Wacko. Insane. You have tried to bite me about a dozen times while I was rescuing you, including while I was trying to stop you from drowning. I can't turn into a polar bear around muggles to slap some sense into you, but I am going to need to slap some sense into you. You are going to need to be restrained when all the damage the Dementors did to your mind gets bad. If I try to smuggle someone in a straitjacket or on a medical stretcher, they are going to know it's you. If you start freaking out dressed like a normal person, everyone is going to see. Muggles authorities and the DMLE liaisons are going to see. Sirius screamed at her, I am under control. Woof woof, barked Fred. Ayo, howled George helpfully. I can't make you look normal. I can't transport you magically. I have to get you to London where you can take legal sanctuary without people taking a good look at you. I can't hide you. I can't make people not see you. I can, however, make people not notice you. I am not insane. Sirius whispered as Millicent dragged him to the Vauxhall and its heater. Don't worry, mate, cheered Fred. Stay with us a bit, offered George, and you will be. Concluded Fred. The drive back in the warmth was too much for Sirius. He turned into a dog and went to sleep. When they got back to the hotel, and Sirius saw what he was to wear, he was torn between bursting out laughing and trying to jump through the window. You cannot expect me to wear that. I am Sirius Orion Black. I am a hit wizard with the Ministry. I am heir to an ancient and noble house. I am not dressing as some sort of leather pervert, Sirius said. Exactly, Millicent said happily. You would never stoop to such a thing. Sirius Orion Black turned his head up at the whole of Pure Blood Society, refused to bend the knee to Voldemort, refused to play politics even to aid your own career. Everyone knows you are the Gryffindor's Gryffindor. If there is a door marked certain death that you can walk through, and one marked slight skin rash you have to bend to enter, you will choose certain death with your head held high. I am sorry to report this, but the year after your imprisonment, your grandfather passed. You were heir Black. Now you are Lord Sirius Orion Black, Lord of the most ancient and noble House Black, Millicent said softly. Sirius held his head up proudly. Millicent took his lifted chin as the opportunity to snap the collar around his neck that read only Slave Boy 3. You have no wand. None of us can apparate. All the portkey sources are being watched by the Ministry. The Auras have their best men at the airports and checkpoints along all the roadways. They have teams with Dementors checking the trains. Every fast mode and discreet mode of transport is being checked, said Millicent with a grin. Sirius was blocking Fred and George from buckle more fetish gear onto his lanky form. What has that got to do with this leather pervert wear? Sirius demanded. Millicent smiled softly. I killed Lord Selwyn to take his house. As part of my inventory, it turns out I own a pair of fetish clubs. One of them is straight, one gay. Both are vampire-run, because of course House Selwyn is in bed with the vampires. But while I was chatting with the vampires about travel to and from Scotland, they told me they could arrange a very special cruise. One that will make any poor, straight-laced Aura stuck, dealing with passengers want to spend as much time hiding in his cabin as possible. Sirius blinked. Your plan to defeat Wizarding Britain's whole Aura Corps manhunt is to march me in a leather jockstrap, face mask, right past the wizard checkpoint. Millicent laughed. Of course not. You will be crawling. In the end, no one noticed Lord Sirius Black. He was wearing a black leather face mask with dog ears. He crawled beside the two-wheeled cart that Millicent rode in, a wonderful affair of black and silver. She wore a blood-red gown with black corset and high boots. A small back hat with half veil covered half her face, and a black leather riding crop, with a wand inserted into it, completed the ensemble. She cracked the crop loudly several times as her two ginger pony boys raced her chariot up the gangplank, her poor dog-slave whimpering as he tried to keep up with his hands bound in pad-like goves. Muggle freaks, Auragina Pevemere said as she shrank back. No charms, no glamours, and the thief's downfall spray didn't change anything. No polyjuice or transfiguration. Her partner, Fred Podmore, said, looking at them in disgust. How did we get stuck with this damned assignment? We should be watching the black market portkey locations or the Muggle airports, not dealing with these Muggle degenerates. No one is taking a slow boat to London when they break out of Azkaban. fumed Aura Pevemere. Have to scourgify every bloody thing you touch or sit on. No telling what those muggles have done on it or to it. Aura Pardmore shuddered. That's it, Pardmore. I'm not leaving the cabin until we get to London. I will pay the oblivators out of my own damned pay packet to forget this entire voyage. Aura Pevemere swore. Too right, boss. Merlin's bloody beard. I don't want to see here or remember anything they get up to on this pervert cruise. Bloody muggles. Aura Pardmore swore. In their cabin later that night, Sirius Black met Noodle. At first Millicent would translate, but soon Noodle was past Sirius' shields and into the shattered wreckage of his mind. The mind of Speaker's godfather. Noodle was a patient snake. He would work slowly, build the broken bits back that he would need to work on his own mind. Noodle could not do much yet, only stop the dissolution of a mind already failing. Midsummer would come soon, and true healing could be done. Until then, Noodle would teach Padfoot how to survive. For 10 years, he had howled his hate at the Dementors. For 10 years, he had waged the war of the forgotten and the damned in the shore, and certain knowledge his corpse would one day join the sewer stench of the main shaft, when there was no longer enough left for the Dementors to feed on. Noodle had to find the bit of man, the one who held faith so long ago out of love of a boy. Not the warrior in his endless fight. That one was mad beyond saving. Noodle had to find the man who held a tiny baby in his hands and swore both love and protection to it. During the night, Sirius would wake up screaming, and Millicent would take out her whip and start cracking it loudly. Fred and George would loudly begin shouting ridiculous things they found from Muggle movies they would never explain to Millicent, too young and innocent they claimed. No one thought to investigate the sound of one more voice screaming in the night, when the sounds of whips and happy voices begging for another made it plain that playtime was on. During the day, Noodle and Sirius would again spend hours staring into each other's eyes, Sirius refusing to let Noodle in until Noodle offered to trade memory for memory. Noodle would share Harry's life through Noodle's eyes, if Sirius would let Noodle into the torn, screaming places in his head to open the worst of the cysts, and let their mental toxins bleed into his consciousness where Sirius could at least see them. A regal noblewoman with her giant black grim on a leash strode into Gringotts with 2 looming bodyguard wizards behind her in serious conservative suits, with the proud house Selwyn crest large on their right breast, their eyes cold and hard, and their wands at the ready as they framed her in the Gringotts entrance. The Gringotts goblin guard sneered as he sloped his halberd in front of the arrogant pure blood who thought to bring an animal into Gringotts in defiance of the treaty. No wizard animals in Gringotts save post owls, sneered the goblin. 4 other goblin warriors moved to pen her in, and a dozen more moved from the secret doors on either side of the entrance in case her 2 red-headed guard wizards made trouble. In a low voice the goblin could barely hear, the young black-haired witch spoke in rough but passable gobbledygook. This is no dog. This is Lord Sirius Orion Black, godfather of Harry Potter, son of Griphook. He comes to the nation to claim sanctuary within his clan. I am Millicent Bulstrode, by blood and bone, soul and stone, kin to Harry Potter. I have brought Harry's godfather home. Millicent said her goblin rough and almost laughable, if not one wizard in 1,000 ever bothered to learn even the common greetings. The guard goblins sneered, and Millicent sneered back. Wizards and witches in the bank began to whisper. That decided things for the goblin. This was goblin business. Wizards had no business whispering about it. I am Heartfang. If you lie, I will have the head from your shoulders and the gold from your vaults. He sneered. Not on your best day, not with twice the goblins you brought with you. Millicent sneered back. The goblin laughed as he led her back to Griphook's office. He didn't know what it was about Griphook and the strange human child he adopted. He seemed to keep finding the only polite wizards and witches in all of Britain. If he didn't kill this girl, he would have to buy her dinner and hear the tale of her journey. He laughed a particular goblin laugh. Blood and glory or information and story, there was profit either way. This was going to be a good day. Chapter 30, Midsummer Gifting. Auras Williamson and Proudfoot stood in the office of Account Manager Griphook. Aura Williamson handed over a magically sealed parchment festooned with ribbons and shrouded in a charm that did nothing more than draw every eye that was not skilled in occlumency to stare at its magnificence in awe. Sadly, it did not work on goblins. Griphook sliced it open with a claw and snorted, as Ora Williamson reacted like the trained parrot he was, not the skilled warrior an Ora was supposed to be, and chirped out a repeat of the parchment's contents. You are ordered to turn over the fugitive Sirius Black to Ora custody, so that the mandatory kiss on site order can be completed by the Dementors you unjustly refused access. Ora Williamson said, his chest puffing up as if even speaking the words of Cornelius Fudge made him somehow important. Griphook had met Fudge. He had no actual fudges that had more fiber and resembled excrement less than the wizard's minister of magic. Griphook was a goblin, and all goblins are pendants when it comes to contract law. It is Lord Sirius Black of the House of Black. We oversaw his heir ritual and blood ascension shortly after his arrival. His house magic confirmed him as lord, and his ring was brought from his vault. He was never given a trial, and thus is not legally a convict, and thus does not fall under any fugitive pursuit clauses of the Goblin Treaty. This has also been confirmed by magic, as if he had been convicted under wizarding law, he would not have been able to take up his ring. Griphook smiled, and tore the parchment in half and tossed it in the Aura's face. None of that matters. Sirius Black was collared by friend of the Goblin Nation, the Lady Selwyn, Millicent Bulstrode, on a recent hunt in the Hebrides. It seems he attempted to poach a dragon she had hunted, and as punishment she collared him. As she is a friend to my son Harry, and knew Sirius Black was kin to him, she brought him here and offered him as a gift to my son Harry. That makes him property of my son. That makes him goblin property. As Lord of House Black, he is property that represents millions of galleons and a huge block of votes in the Wizargamot. That is a gift of great worth, and you think to take it from my house so you can simply destroy it with your unclean pets? I think not. Tell Minister Fudge not to ask for what he cannot take. Griphook smiled and laid his sword across his desk and stroked the hilt lovingly. Ora Proudfoot had enough disrespect at that point. Do you claim a wizard can be property of a mere goblin? Proudfoot shouted. Griphook made a banishing gesture and spit over the side of his desk. Of course not. Rare indeed is the wizard worth his feed. No profit in lazy, stupid, inbred, degenerates as most of your kind are. The odds of finding one worth even basic cost to feed and house are astronomical. Miss Bulstrode is widely respected by goblin kind as having a rare eye for value. A slave she took will of course be seen as valuable, to the point that we are even investing healing in this asset, that it can be even more valuable in future. Ora Williamson snarled at Griphook, I should kill you right now. Griphook smiled a wide, toothy grin in return. You should, you really should. That would trigger an automatic goblin rebellion, and my son Harry Potter and his sword kin, Lord Neville Longbottom, Hermione Granger, Millicent Bulstrode of Selwyn, and now Lord Sirius Black will be fighting at our side. Potter and Longbottom put half the light faction at our side due to existing treaty house obligations when Harry and Neville take up their rings at midsummer, with Black and Selwyn already having their rings, bringing a good portion of the dark faction to our side due to their existing house alliances. Griphook caressed his sword lovingly and released the catch, placing his hand upon the hilt. Since 1542, the Goblin Nation has never had anything close to parity with the wizarding world, but if you choose to draw your wand against me right now, I can't help but like our chances, he said in a tone filled with an odd kind of lust. Ora Williamson took his hand away from his wand and turned to leave. Your King Ragnot will hear from the minister. He threatened. Griphook simply smiled. If Director Ragnot got a post-owl from the minister about this meeting, he would pay an easy 1,000 galleons for the memory of it, perhaps even more. The old goblin loved to see the wizard squirm, and this had been worth every second of his valuable and limited time. He sighed. The whole thing had been moot anyway. This was June 21st, the midsummer. The children were all at Longbottom Manor to exchange their presents formally for their witch majority. They turned 13 this year, and by magical law were no longer children. Not yet legal adults without further accomplishments, they were now entering the stage where magic was no longer limited. Their core would grow based on their demands and challenges, Their channels would burn wide as power handled properly bore them wider, or scar closed as their mistakes marred them forever. From now, what became of their potential was in their hands. Griphook knew they planned something powerful for midsummer. This was old magic, magic from before wands, magic from before they were nations, when they were scattered tribes calling upon their connection with the wild magic to make them strong enough to defend their tribes from a world where every hand and claw was against them. Wizarding Britain had turned its back on ritual magic. It did not fit the laws and rules that kept power safe, controlled, and contained within the limits and, of course, the hands of the trusted elite who used simply to perpetuate their wealth and status. The days of magic's greatness and daring had faded since the statute of secrecy to simply the great game of politics and influence peddling, where power was measured in who you knew and who you could buy, never what you could do. Wizarding Britain valued stability, conformity, and honestly, mediocrity. He feared his son valued none of that, and Britain was in for a rather rude shock in the next few years. Noon, Longbottom Manor, the forest. Harry and Neville had given their gifts, and as lords their gifts were about what you expected. Pretty extravagant. Draco had given his gifts, but since he was a Slytherin heir with little to no experience with Hufflepuffs, and even less experiences with Slytherins, who were more likely to do extreme violence than ever bother to threaten it, his gifts stuck to areas of extreme pure-blood fashion, which his mother assured them they would all be either unable to provide for themselves or appreciative of the taste shown in his efforts. It was unusual for Draco to care enough to stress over gifts for others. Hermione had prepared Walther PPK with what she considered her basic rune and potion package. Muggle Notice Me Not charms, wards against magnetic detection and explosive detection, silencing charms, acceleration and penetration charms, a red dot holographic light, enhancing and sight rune array instead of those Muggle sights that stick up and get in the way. Her bullets had been a bit of potions experiment gone too far, which required both the bullet and the barrel to be potion temper enhanced, as well as recall compensation charms added. Of course, expansion charms on the magazine were a given. Wizards don't run out of expendables. Why even be magical if you don't cheat? It now hit a bit harder than a Muggle 50 caliber anti-material sniper rifle. She had made those for Neville, Harry, and Millicent because she trusted them not to use them against Muggles in anything but necessary self-defense. Well, in Millicent's case, self-defense was given a certain latitude that included preemptive threat elimination, but she was morally certain no innocents would be shot. She was unable to gift anything to Draco or Sirius, though, as each of her weapons required several weeks' worth of work. Hermione looked troubled, but the little blonde Ravenclaw who had joined the Coven circle for the dance came up to Hermione and hugged her. "Don't worry, Hermione," the little odd Ravenclaw said. "You will give Draco and Sirius the best present ever." Hermione looked down into the surprisingly wide and wise eyes of the little Ravenclaw girl and remembered her name, Luna Lovegood. She looked into those eyes, and something in Hermione flinched from what looked back at her. The first-year Ravenclaw girl was called Loony Luna and marked for always walking around in a daze. Hermione watched Luna swaying and felt the pulse of the magic in the ritual circle for the rite they were beginning now. She noticed Luna was moving perfectly with it. She began to wonder if Luna had been wandering around in a daze or in a vision. She shuddered. Luna bore watching. The ritual of midsummer began, and Millicent had said that her gifts would be part of the ritual and not conducted before. Her gifts were part of their collective coming of age. Hermione had thought it odd. This was midsummer, the height of the power of the sun and fire, the weakest point for Millicent's ice and water. Somehow, though, it felt right. Narcissa Black joined Poppy Pomfrey, Pomona Sprout, Augusta Longbottom, Susan and Amelia Bones, Luna Lovegood, Hannah Abbott, Griselda Marchbanks, Bathsheba Babbling, all three Gryffindor chaser girls, the Weasley twins, and even Mad Eye Moody. The calling of the quarters was almost refreshingly normal, for although all the elemental powers wrapped the calling quartet, no physical manifestations yet accompanied the ritual. Hermione, as the fire touched, was wreathed in flame, but it was her choice if fire burned her or not, so she wore it simply like a crown. This was midsummer, Sunna. The goddess of the sun ruled the sky, and the power of the light and life were at its strongest. She heard the drumming of Alistair Moody and felt the earth answer with every tramp of the dancer's feet. She felt Harry throw his power up at the sky, and lightning lanced down from blue sky at his call, eager to touch the earth and grace it with its potency. Neville's feet touched the ground so lightly for a boy growing as large as he was, for the earth fair rose to receive him, the life within that earth eager to answer his merest call. Lastly, the water witch, the child of ice and silence, held but a fragment of her power at this, the farthest from her own power of Yule, yet as she moved, her every step drove Hermione's fire hotter and brighter. Hermione felt herself separate. Part of her called the blessings of midsummer, and gave the call for healing and plenty that was part of the scripted ritual, but part of her was bound in the tramp of feet, the beating of the drum, the power stirring within the earth, and the power that wanted her to call down something in answer, something she did not yet possess. Hermione looked over at Luna, who had thrown her head back and given herself to the dance. Hermione was all about control, planning, conscious choice. She envied Luna her ability to surrender to magic. For Hermione, a muggle born, this was the hardest lesson of magic. Surrender. Millicent Bulstrode broke the circle and came before Hermione to bow, winter to summer in the time of her primacy. Hermione nodded in turn to grant Millicent leave to speak. Neville Longbottom, receive this midsummer the gift of your manhood. Receive this gift from my hand. Your parents were taken from you by the actions of these three. Receive this gift of vengeance, and I pray it bring you healing. Millicent Bulstrode thought for a second about the wisdom of offering 3 severed human heads before Alistair Moody, greatest living aura, and Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, but this was for Neville. Consequences were for later. From her bag she tossed the heads of the Lestranges. Bellatrix looked defiant, Rabastan looked terrified, Rodolphus looked confused. She heard more than saw the scream of Augusta Longbottom, but her eyes were only upon Neville. Sweet, gentle Neville, who had been forced to kill his own parents because Dumbledore decreed they should be trapped forever in their pain, rather than admit there were more casualties from his failed war. Neville's face was a study. Oddly, the baby fat had long gone, but his face was almost always in a soft and gentle smile that shifted the lines of his face enough to distract you from its basis. Neville was not smiling now, and his face was noble, almost regal, and his blue eyes blazed with all the rage and pain in the world. He held up the head of Bellatrix Lestrange and cried out his rage to the earth. The earth answered. Cruel vines split the earth, and 3 heads became impaled on the growing mass of leaf and thorn that stripped the flesh from the skulls and left them bare and woven within a framework like a wicker cage. Neville's eyes wept, but his face was the bare rock of the mountain, ancient and pitiless. Millicent led Sirius and Draco to the growing tree-like mass of thorns and leaves, and soon Sirius and Draco were bound within. "Mother!" Draco called out in fear as the vines wrapped him helpless. Helpless that reminded him of the helplessness of being trapped inside his body, then cast out of it entirely, while Tom Riddle took it for his own. The ragged bits of Draco's hard-won self-control shattered, and he bled scarlet as the thorns bit into him as he thrashed in pain and terror. All his life he had wanted to be just like his father, only to have his father sacrifice him to a monster as little more than a glove of flesh for the cold, dead hand of a monster. He had fought for his soul at the last, and found he neither recognized nor dared to face what and who it was he had won. Now it seems he would die unknowing. Sirius Orion Black felt the vines wrap him, felt the thorns impale him, felt the hunger of the earth for his blood and life, and the wounded warrior who had fought the cold and soul-devouring touch of the Dementors for a decade felt the fight go out of him. This was it, the clean earth to receive him, the womb of the earth to accept him home. No more struggle, no more denial of what he was, who he was. At long last, the fight was done. He closed his eyes and let the vines wrap him. Harry was safe, Harry was loved. He had lived to see it. It was enough. Harry felt the roiling coils of darkness in himself. Tom Riddle's diary had been the first Horcrux, the deepest cut. More of Voldemort's soul had been lost in the first cut than at any other. All of that was inside Harry now. The magic of his mother sang as she cut Voldemort's soul apart, unraveling his existence a thread at a time. The darkness in him denied healing, denied love, friendship, and loyalty. It valued only power, accepted only fear. Harry felt the curse scar pulse, felt the rune his mother's magic had woven into it, the wand movement of the killing curse, and the power rune, the sun rune Swalo. He felt the sun burn upon the goblin's silver, and the heat burned his flesh. Stepping forward, Harry gave himself to the thorns of Neville's weaving, and they bound him between Sirius and Draco. Harry smiled as the thorns bound him with his face to the sky, his Swalo rune burning like a torch even in the sunlight. Neville nodded, his own grief and fury twisting within him, poisoning him. Neville wanted to be a healer, wanted to nurture and grow things, but the pain of his parents' suffering had been the axis on which his life had turned for so long. Even the deaths of the Lestrain were not enough to free him. His hatred and rage still howled within him. Stepping forward, Neville closed his eyes and fell into the thorns. They welcomed him and embraced him. Lord of the giving earth, the Reaper, he who rules the cycle of life, surrendered himself to the binding. Millicent was terrified this last gift was a mistake. The amulets she had taken from the Azkaban guards who got in her way had only one thing in them: ash. Ash that burned her skin the way that only the primal fires of creation could burn her who was Issa, the primordial ice of the void. The ash of a phoenix. Millicent stepped forward, opened her present to Hermione, a single amulet that held the ash of the 3 guards she had knocked out on her journey up the Tower of Azkaban. Millicent took the ash and marked Hermione's face with Kenna's, the torch, the rune of fire. Hermione felt it. The death. The death of the phoenix caught up in the ashes the Ministry had taken and bound. In violation of all natural laws, they had bound the ashes of the phoenix so it could not be reborn, that the power of its primal fire of creation, its ultimate spark of life, should be barrier and protection against the soul-sucking parasites of shadow and hunger called Dementors. This was wrong. There was a price to be paid for all things. No magic is free. It is all paid for by life, effort, and pain. Knowledge is not given, it is earned. Magic seeks balance, and this chaining of the ever-renewing phoenix into death, so that the Ministry could control its psychic vampires, was a violation of the natural order she could not permit. Hermione did not notice striding forward to give herself to the thorns until she had been bound in them and raised highest above the 4 bound men. Crowned in flames, she blazed like the Queen of Summer, marked in the ashes of a death that should not be. Fire wreathed her flesh, but did not burn. In that instant she understood. She understood why she could not claim her form. She understood how to right the wrong of the Azkaban amulets. She was crowned in fire, wreathed in flames, yet by her will it did not burn her. This was midsummer. This was the time of the sun, the burning time, the fire time. It was not time for her to rule over fire. It was time to give herself to it. Fire took her flesh. Her hair ignited, her flesh burned. Hermione screamed as her body writhed in pain beyond the cruciatus she had already suffered, as her entire skin burst into flame and was consumed. The 4 men in the fire felt the thorns surrounding them transform into flame, and the 2 screamed as the fire sunk its claws into them and burned. From Sirius, the cold of Azkaban burned from his flesh and from his soul, but he screamed as it was taken from him, for no magic is without cost, and his cost was memory. He remembered his brother Regulus, Regulus who loved him, but who tried to please his parents as Sirius never could. He remembered lashing out at him because Regulus loved him enough to take it, where his parents never would. He remembered starting to prank the bullies in first year because he was strong and brave enough to fight back, and he was proud. Then he got stronger and remembered pranking those he didn't like because he could, then those who dared accuse him of being a bully because he didn't like how they made him feel. Then those he chose to suffer just because, unlike mother and father, he was the strong one here, and he could be the one giving, not receiving pain. Sirius threw his head back and screamed. Had he only been that boy, perhaps he would have surrendered to that flame and chose his end, but he had been more. He had fought a long, dark war against an enemy that was always stronger, always better led, better supplied, with knowledge of ever plan and secret stronghold. Sirius had kept the faith, never caring if the ones he defended also spit on his name behind his back for his black blood and the many Death Eaters who bore it. That Sirius bore the scars of his mistakes, and looked back at those he could not save and swore oaths upon his name and power to do better, to be better. To give him his due, he had tried. He screamed into the fire and wept tears of cold, black despair like poison from his eyes. He burned, and he healed. Draco Malfoy writhed in the fire, a boy who lived a life in shadow, thinking it was darkness. Neither sunlight's warmth nor the darkness cold had ever touched him, so he sported in shadow and dreamed he knew the night. When the night had claimed him, when he hung screaming upon the gallows of his choices, while the darkest lord of the last century wrote the legacy of his crimes into Draco's memory and soul, he had not been strong enough to die, but not weak enough to surrender. The mudblood Lilly Potter had chosen not to let him die, had dragged him back and forced him to fight for his own life. The mudblood Hermione Granger had chosen not to leave him broken, and now forced him to heal. 1,000 broken places in his soul where the memories of Voldemort were too foul, too bitter, too potent for Draco to face. His soul had recoiled and withdrawn. He had left cysts of darkness in his mind because Draco Malfoy had not been strong enough to face them. Hermione did not care. Her fire lit the dark places inside him, and Draco had no choice but to see. Fire flayed and scourged him, beneath the beating wings and punishing claws of that terrible bird of fire. Draco ran from the flame behind him and tore into and through the pockets of darkness, accepting the pain and horror of their touch, to offer the corrupting dark rather than his fragile soul to the punishing flame within. The darkness of Voldemort was burned away, but Draco was both scarred and healed by the fire that cleansed him. Whole now, Draco had all his shadows stripped away and stared upon the naked truth of his own soul and wept for it. Harry felt the primal fire of creation wash over him, tear into him, sear and scourge him. Harry was not forged of darkness or light. Harry was the storm and sky, madness and ecstasy, inspiration and wisdom. He embraced the pain and turned his gaze upward to see Hermione's flesh slough away as her body died. For this was the truth. The phoenix was born from death, and its coming cleansed the world. Neville felt his vines tear into her flesh, felt her blood run over them, offering her blood to the hungry earth, even as the fire in her caught every leaf and branch. Neville felt that fire burn into him, the fires of creation and destruction, the fires of purity and healing. Neville felt the years of fear and the hatred and rage he called up to defend himself. He saw the 3 skulls now hanging before his face, seem to writhe in the flames and be consumed. Consumed like the fear he need no longer feel. Consumed like the hatred and rage he had built brick by brick to hold back the fear of these monsters, and the greater fear he would never be strong enough to defend those he loved from similar monsters. Neville sank his roots deep into the earth. He let the fire burn him. Drawing up strength from the ever-renewing earth, he let the fire burn away what was no longer needed. He was Jira, the harvest, the reaper, the lord of the cycle of death and rebirth. His was the gift of endings, and it was time for the fear, the rage, and the hate to end. He offered them to the fire. He offered up his pain, and though he had the power to end the flames, he chose to embrace them and pay the price for his healing. Hermione felt his flesh slough away and feathers form. Her feet became talons. Her cry became a call to magic more potent than any spell. She felt the magic of the circle, as all of those who gave their magic to this circle of healing at midsummer had offered their magic, their will, their struggle, and their pain to the working. A gift for a gift was the way. Hermione spread her wings and soared. As she flew, she ringed the circle 3 times sunward, and with each passage her power washed over those inside, and the magic of renewal, of healing, and of joy was given. Beneath her, the vines and thorns had been consumed, the skulls were no more. Draco, Sirius, Neville, and Harry lay awake and panting, physically whole and spiritually cleansed. The changes that had been wrought within them must be worked through, for no gift of magic is without cost. Hermione landed on the ground before Millicent, and the Queen of Summer bowed, thankful for the gift she had been given. The ash of the dead phoenix had been what Hermione had lacked. In all her master of fire, she had never understood that to be the phoenix is to surrender to the burning. That is a lesson that can only be learned from ash and loss, for hope is found only in the darkness. Sirius and Draco both stood taller, and their flesh no longer hung on them like skeletons in flesh robes, but the flat muscles of duelists. Neville was no longer hunched, but stood open and relaxed. Harry was, well, Harry Hermione sighed. Harry grinned. There was perhaps too much goblin in the boy to ever really be aware of the risk or danger of what they did, or perhaps too much trust that his friends would never hurt him, even by accident. Luna came and hugged her again. Hermione flinched as she assumed her flames would burn Luna, but it seems Luna was correct. The flames just seemed to make her smile. I knew you would fly today. A beacon needed to be it. The light needed to remember it was meant to heal and teach, not simply to burn away the darkness and blind those that stare too long at it. Luna cheered, which Hermione felt somehow was not a ringing endorsement of the light faction itself. In the dinner following the ritual, over the boar that had been roasting over a spit for most of the day, Amelia Bones argued with her chief subordinate. She as much as admitted she murdered those three. Argued Amelia Bones. Didn't admit it, implied it. Very Slytherin, plus they're Death Eaters, so screw them, said Mad Eye Moody. We have evidence she participated in a jailbreak at Azkaban, Amelia argued. Nope, burned up. Phoenix are damned hard on evidence that way, cheered Mad Eye, moving to grab some potato salad to go with the boar. We have a convicted murderer right here at the buffet, argued Amelia, grabbing some of the Greek salad to add to her plate. No trial, ergo not convicted. Plus, I saw the guy he supposedly killed 10 years ago when he was less than 10 minutes dead just a couple weeks back. Can't be a murderer if the bugger lived. Covered that in aura training at some point, I think. Mood said, then made a valiant attempt to wiggle a slice of pie onto his overloaded plate. It failed, but Amelia's wandless levitation held it in place until they got to the table. She turned into a bloody Phoenix Alastair. That can't be normal. We should report this to somebody. Amelia said, waving her arms in the air and losing a black olive off her fork to land on Sirius Black's shoulder as he tried to see how much ham he could consume in a sitting. Mad Eye looked at his boss and grinned. Report to who? Fudge will lose his mind that a Muggle-born can turn into a phoenix and has a claim to being the new Lord of the Light rather than Albus Bloody Dumbledore. Report to Albus Dumbledore that we were at one of those coven magic rituals he had the Wizengamot make illegal, but inside Longbottom Manor, so there is bugger all he can legally do about it, and one of his Muggle-born students just manifested the ability to turn into a phoenix. I mean, he calls himself Champion of Light, because one hangs out in his office. The Granger girl can turn bloody into one. Albus will lose his mind. Report to the Wizengamot that a mudblood just manifested a power Merlin never claimed. In fact, that hasn't been claimed since the ancient times when words like goddess and witch sometimes got a bit blurry around the edges. I'm sure all the sacred 28 families will just sit back quietly and let the magical superiority their rule is based on get negated and just leave her to complete her education totally unharmed. Mad Eye grinned. Amelia glared at him, took her fork, and stole a piece of his pie off his plate. Remind me why I haven't fired you yet. Amelia snarled. Mad Eye smirked. Seniority. I would cost more from my pension than my pay, what with all the awards I picked up during the war. I think if you combine all the extra years' service that goes along with each of my medals, I would cost about 5 times more retired than on the job. Amelia growled and chewed his pie. It was easier to swallow than his words. Actually, it was amazing pie. Longbottoms knew how to set a table, she sighed. They didn't even bother trying to swear anyone to secrecy. It is like it has never occurred to them that it isn't just Death Eaters they need to watch for. Amelia finally snarled. Sirius is a wanted man, legality of his status or not. Moody laughed. Hufflepuffs like me. I was a dewy-eyed young innocent once. Trusted in the fairness of the system, the wisdom of my superiors, and the justice of our lords and masters of the Wizengamot. Amelia felt her brain shut down at the idea of Alastair, Mad Eye Moody, whose war cry of constant vigilance was the nightmare of every Aura recruit in the last 20 years, was once a dewy-eyed innocent like these 4 trusting idiots. She looked over at Millicent, who she found watching her and Alastair coldly in return. Well, 3 innocents, and they're seeing eye Slytherin. Morgana's tits Alastair. I think the murdering little Slytherin is our best hope of reason for the 4 idiots. Amelia sighed. Alastair laughed and pounded her on the back like he just heard the funniest joke ever. Somewhere out there Voldemort was stirring. Forces all over Europe were stirring. His allies were gathering again, and the best hope of wizarding Britain were currently watching Sirius Black try to toss bits of ham to a magical rock viper across a 20-foot dining table as if it was the natural way to celebrate midsummer. Merlin help her. This was going to be a strange war.